Thank you so much for coming a little late, but in such a huge number. So we are glad at least we have quite many students to greet Samya Brata Roy for this talk today, What's Distant About Distant Reading. Now this talk has been curated as part of our compulsory thesis 2 course, and I'm thankful to Swati for bringing in her DH students here as well. So welcome to all of you. And a very warm welcome to Samya Brata Roy, who's very generously agreed to take time out of his very busy schedule right now before his PhD thesis defense. And it's due in a few weeks, but he's still figured out, because this was the most opportune. Yeah, because I'm very grateful, so I have to convey that thank you in the best way possible. So a little short introduction about him. You've already read his bio note, but just to reiterate it once more. Samya Brata Roy is a PhD scholar at IIT Jodhpur. He is an affiliate faculty at the San Diego State University, an affiliated researcher with the University of Regensburg.
Yeah.
He is a fellow at the University of London, an ELO fellow, and a scholar with #. His interests and publications lie in and around visual culture and digital humanities. He is currently editing 2 special issues with the new review of hypermedia and multimedia and reviews in digital humanities. He co-founded eLit India, is a governing body member with the Dharti, and a graduate committee member with Ardin. He is an IITF member with AHO, for 2022 to 24, and a technical advisory member with with Humanities Commons for 2022, and a liaison with ACH for 2021. As you can clearly see, he's a young scholar, but a very, very bright scholar. And with a huge round of applause and a big thank you, I would like to welcome Samya. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible to everybody virtually, distantly, and close. I just want to see where the keyboard is. Okay. So once again, good morning. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Dr. Das, for that lovely introduction. Thank you. I have been made aware that unconsciously I am wearing the colors of the school. So I think that is that is a nice job on my part. So yeah. My talk is titled, What's So Distant About Distant Reading? I gather that many of you are familiar with the idea of digital humanities and the ideas of reading. But when we talk about reading, more often than not, I'm also trained in literary studies. We tend to associate the idea of closeness with the concept of reading, you know, close reading and stuff like that. Now, what is this Frankenstein's monster that we have here called distant reading? Because this is a very controversial, for multiple reasons that we will discuss within the field of literary studies. However, the implications of the concept of distant reading goes beyond literary studies, so as to speak. So yeah, I'll start. So here are a few images. First of all is stone with inscriptions. And then there's this person in a library reading a manuscript. Then there is this person reading a codex, a book, a paperback book. And then there is myself looking at this weird thing called an Apple Vision Pro. That reminds me of an aquarium more than anything else. So within all of this, what is it that you find to be something that's common? Can anybody take a stab? Can anybody take a guess that amongst all of these images, is there any point of commonality? Yeah? Yeah. So you're engaging with forms of information in different ways, right? So yes, that's very correct. Thank you so much. So these are different modes of engaging with information and how that have changed across time. If you are aware with this person called Marshall McLuhan and the idea of the medium being the message, which is also has been challenged, but the idea of media and different changing forms of media and how that conveys information to different forms of receivers is something very important that we must consider. And one of the fundamental limitations or criticisms of literary studies as a discipline, and especially close reading as a practice, is that it has a tendency of eliminating the material mode of existence or the form of media. This is something that has been challenged by various scholars, and one of the most prominent being N. Catherine Hales, who uses a very dramatic expression where she says that literary studies have been sleeping in the age of print, which I find to be a very dramatic statement. So moving on, this is once again another very funny little graphic that is going on. Can anybody, I mean, that doesn't really take rocket science to guess. Can anybody guess what this is? Yeah, you may have. So, yeah. Anybody? Yes. Yeah, yes. Yes, of course. But characters of, could you go a little further? Yes, yes. So, and what does this image tell you? Does it tell you anything? Does it show anything? It's the most evident information on the face of Earth. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So, who do you think is the central character here? Yeah. So, Hamlet is the central character of Hamlet. It's a shock, I know. So, when we were introduced to distant reading, it was back in 2019 at a workshop at IIT Gandhinagar. We were introduced by this concept saying that this is one of the most useful and useless concepts that we will learn in digital humanities. That the central character of Hamlet is Hamlet, and in order to prove that, you need a bunch of machines. So, yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. But it has a broader purpose. It has a bigger purpose. This image is shown primarily because it generates shock value, as you can understand. And this is primarily the book and the theoretical conceptualizations that I will be talking about. You might have heard a lot about cultural analytics, big data, distant reading, this and that. But more often than not, there can be a problem in digital humanities, that is we call the dichotomy between the act of making versus the act of thinking, or doing versus thinking. So because digital humanities, as you can understand, is an interdisciplinary branch of exploring knowledge, there is also a possibility of deliverables, that you can actually do a project, you can actually show something, you can actually create something, you can create a project, you can create something, and you can actually show. Now, because you have the temptation of a tangible deliverable, more often than not, the temptation of producing a deliverable, something to show, a shiny project, overtakes the idea of embedding itself in a sense of humanistic and critical dialogue. Which is why, whenever we engage with any form of computation to do anything in humanities, for that matter, it is very important to ground ourselves ideologically. And this talk primarily aims to do that, to give an ideological foundation of what this beast, digital humanities, or distant reading more importantly so, is about. Where does it come from, where does it emerge from, what its implications are. While I can understand that you or anybody may be interested more in producing a work, hands-on experimental stuff, right? But it is equally important to ground yourself in a particular ideology, in a tradition, or multiple traditions, in order to situate yourselves better, which is what we call as something that we know as positionality. The politics of positionality is fundamentally important in any form of humanistic research. Okay, now, as I said, that this is a very controversial concept. Controversial concepts for reasons aplenty. Controversial concepts because of Franco Moretti being a very controversial scholar in the field of literary studies, for reasons that I'm may not need to trudge in this talk. And distant reading as a concept has been fundamentally ripped apart by literary studies scholars for reasons that will become very apparent to you. Now, because of it is so controversial, I can perhaps conclude that this is cancelled. But may or may not be the case, as we shall see. So, well, this might be a little bit didactic in certain senses, and I apologize if it becomes so. But in order to kind of give you a scholarly grounding, I need to talk about certain excerpts from the text of distant reading. So, the book, I have it with me. If anybody is interested, get in touch. I will share the book with you. And these are the page numbers from where the concepts are taken. So I'll just read bits and pieces. So the first half of the talk would be a little bit about the theoretical grounding, and the next part would be a bit more about the real-life implications in different types of projects and so on and so forth. Okay, so what is Moretti talking about? That this text, the text which is strictly Wallerstein being a very important critic, his day of synthesis occupies 1/3 of a page, 1/4, maybe half, the rest are quotations, years of analysis, other people's analysis, which Wallerstein's page synthesizes into a system. Any of you who, I mean, mostly the students, of course, if you have engaged with academic writing as your instructors have been teaching you, you may or may not yet have been familiar with the concept of a literature review. If you have, then you know what a literature review is supposed to do. And if you have done a literature review, this thought may or may not have occurred to you that I am just citing other people's work. Where is my voice, right? But then, when you do academic writing, there is a very curious tightrope walk that you have to do, is that you need to cite other people's work, arrive at a research gap, then make your contribution, and then your voice is supposed to emerge. Initially, there is the crisis of your own voice being there without the research grounding in place. But once you get your research grounding, it is just the research of other people and your voice is lost. This is a crisis that I had when I first started my PhD. When I used to show my supervisors my writing, they used to say, oh, you are quoting this, but where's your voice? Where are you in your paper? You are no longer there. It's just a collage of citations. So this element of citing other people's work to build an aspect of narrative is something that is being talked about here. That years of analysis, other people's analysis, which Wallerstein's page synthesizes into a system. Where is he going with this? We shall see. Now, if we take this model seriously, the act of synthesizing, that is, the study of world literature, will somehow have to reproduce this page. What does he mean by this? Therefore, if I assume that if you are synthesizing something and if you have an imaginary course with very utopic ideals called world literature, then a course, if a course description comes to you as a page, then the page should synthesize, ideally speaking, the entirety of world literature. But does that happen? No, because we can't read everything in a course, right? We have to somehow reproduce this page, which is to say, this relationship between analysis and synthesis. Are we synthesizing information? Are we just collecting information? Are we just listing information? Or are we analyzing certain information, the tightrope walk that I was talking about for the literary field? But in that case, literary history will quickly become very different from what it is now. I gather that most of the students here are undergraduate students, and so the idea and the politics of literary history and world literature might be a little heavy. But literary history, you can just imagine the history of literature and how it has been produced across spaces and time, which is obviously a non-linear construct. Therefore, will become very different from what it is now. It will become a second-hand, a patchwork of other people's research, as I was talking about, a collage of citations, right? Without a single direct textual reading. Now, this is a problem in many places, is that you need to build courses, you need to build syllabi that is so heavy, so broad, so overarching. Certain doctoral courses or certain master's courses have such huge reading lists that you look at the reading lists and you wonder, am I humanly supposed to read all this in an entire semester? Without a direct textual reading. Still ambitious. And actually, even more so than before, because we are talking about world as a geographical entity. But the ambition is now directly proportional to the distance from the text, as in who you are and how far you are from a text. Let's say if I am a Bengali upper class, upper caste man with all of my privileges in place, and if I am looking at Dalit writing, then how do I configure the distance of myself and my privileges from that text? So this distance applies to everything, every text that you may encounter. And this aspect of distance is also something that we know as difference, which is also incredibly important in positioning ourselves. Therefore, the more ambitious the project, the greater must the distance be. Therefore, if you want to create a course on world literature, if you want to create a course on a subject that utopically encapsulates the entire world in conversation, the distance from yourself will be even greater compared to if you were designing a course on Indian writing, let's say. So this is what I was talking about, citations everywhere, and of course citations, references, nobody has the time to do all of that. So it's a balance between identifying both of these ideas. And now, this is the second most important thing. This is from the same page, I guess, page number 48. He is talking about the academia in the United States. The United States is a country of close reading. Obviously, this was written a few years ago. So I don't expect this idea to be particularly popular, the idea of distance reading. But the trouble with close reading, in all of its incarnations, from new criticism to deconstruction, is that it necessarily depends on an extremely small canon. Now, I'd like to unpack this statement a little bit. When you are engaging in the act of close reading, when you are reading line by line, when you are reading in between the lines, when you are saying what is unsaid, etc., it is not humanly possible for you to read everything and anything that is out there in the world. You only can read how much you can read, and that will be an extremely small amount of texts, which is what we do in literary studies. We do something that we call as micro-narratives, micro-histories, personal experiences, right? But it also poses a challenge. The challenge is that the corpus, the samples that we are undertaking, is extremely limited for a good reason. This may have become an unconscious and invisible premise by now, but it is an iron one nonetheless. You invest so much in individual texts only if you think that very few of them really matter. Now, in the process of experiencing or close reading different texts, you may or may not give more importance to certain texts than certain other texts. Many people read Amitava Ghosh for a course on post-colonial studies. Very few people read Kalyani Thakur Choral, for example. Very few people know the name of Kalyani Thakur Choral, for instance. So therefore, this undue importance is something that we must keep in mind. And if you want to look beyond the canon, of course, and of course world literature will do so, it would be absurd if it didn't, which is why it is called world literature in the first place. Close reading can't do it, is what he is saying. Of course, there are challenges to these ideas. It is not designed to do it, it is designed to do the opposite. Once again, this is what he thinks. You can completely disagree with him. At bottom, it is a theological exercise, close reading. Very solemn treatment of a few texts taken very seriously, like reading the Bible or reading other religious texts. Whereas what we really need is a little pact with the devil. So he is acknowledging that this is risky business. We know how to read texts. Yes, of course we do. Now let's learn how to not read them. Distant reading, where distance, let me repeat, is a condition of knowledge, distancing yourself from the text that you are reading or interacting with. It allows you to focus on units that are much smaller. And what does he mean by this? I will come to that. Now, this is from page numbers 53, 56, and 57, where he's talking about that the beauty of distant reading plus world literature is that they go against the grain of national historiography. This might be a little heavy. So when we are engaging in the act of writing a national history, let's say you visit the Sahitya Academy and you pick up a book from the library which says History of Indian Literature, and you read about your Mulk Raj Anands, about your R.K. Narayans, or even Anita Desai somewhere sprinkled in between, right? But do you think those are the only authors who wrote during that time? No. There have been many other authors who have written, who have published, but for reasons whatever, their works have not been that popular. So as you can understand, so when we are engaging in an act of national historiography, historiography being the act of writing history, and when we are doing the act of history of literature in a national context, that is the national literary historiography, then the distant reading, if distant reading is supposed, a distant reading on world literature is supposed to consider everything that has been ever written, then it by definition goes against the idea of national or nationalist historiography, because any form of historiography cannot take all materials into consideration. That is not humanly possible, as we have seen. Now he says that he hadn't expected such a spectrum of outcomes. So at first I was taken aback, and only later realized that this was probably the most valuable finding of them all, because it showed that world literature was indeed a system of variations. How does world literature become a system of variations? He gives the example of the tree and wave model, which is something that I will come to later on. The system was one, but not uniform. The pressure from the Anglo-French core, if you know your history of the novel, you know what you're talking about here, to make it uniform, but it could never fully erase the reality of difference, the difference that I was talking about. How you are different from what you are reading, or how you are similar to what you are reading. So if you read The Pressure from the Anglo-French Core, if you know your comparative literature, your Emily Apters, your Pascal Casanovas, the whole debate between form and content, local form, foreign content, foreign form, local content. I'll just give you an example, is that the novel as a form is understood to have primarily come in India as a direct result of foreign colonial influence from firstly the French culture and then from the English side. The first novel, most popular one of course, is written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay called Rajmohan's Wife. It was written in English, but ironically Bankim Chandra made a name for himself as a writer in Bengali. So quite clearly his ambitions did not pan out. So if you look at Rajmohan's Wife, if you look at the structure of Rajmohan's Wife, how he tried to write the text, it is very clear how he is taking local content, that is the story that is rooted in the idea of Bengaliness, nationalism, whatever, and then he is assimilating that with the foreign form, that is the form of the novel, and then something hybrid emerges. And then you can obviously critique this, that's saying that you can't create a binary between the local form, foreign content, or foreign content and local form, and there are intermediaries. Obviously, you are right. But this is dialectic. As a dialectic, this is helpful to engage in conversations. So forms are abstracts of social relationships. And what does it mean by abstracts of social relationships? Now let me add on the few terms that compromise, by which I mean something a little different from what Frederick Jameson, another very important figure in Marxist criticism, world literature, had in mind in his introduction to Karatani. So Frederick Jameson, a very famous Marxist critic, passed away a few days ago, had this whole idea of world literature as national allegory. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this example, but his whole idea that literature produced from the so-called third world, or the so-called majority worlds, as we call it now, are bound to somehow adhere to a sense of national allegory, is that any novel that becomes popular in India is bound to talk about independence, poverty, and so on and so forth, which is also now known as the poverty porn, or making yourself seem poor, or every story becomes a Midnight's Children, which refers to the struggle of Indian independence, and so on and so forth, right? So this, for him, for Jameson, the relationship is fundamentally a binary one, form and content. The abstract formal patterns of Western novel construction, the construction of the novel form, and the raw material of the Japanese social experience, which is this particular author here, right here. Raw material of the Japanese social experience. He's talking about a Japanese text. So form and content, basically. For me, for Moretti, it is more of a triangle. As I said, you can critique that dialectic, right? It is foreign form, local material, and local form. Now, as you can understand, you can complicate, you can play, you can destruct this typology as much as you want. But where does he go with this? Now, as you can understand, this whole business of comparison, usually when we are reading, when we are writing, when we are researching, when we are analyzing, we are engaging in an act of comparison. We are engaging with a text material, we are reading it, we are writing about it. But more often than not, what we are reading, what we are writing is something that we don't have lived experience of. Therefore, our act of reading becomes an act of comparing our experience with the experience that is being written about. And it is the discourse, it is an exchange of these experiences that leads us to write our research. And therefore, this whole idea of comparison becomes fundamental to the idea of world literature, which is why world literature occupies a central position within the discipline of comparative literature. And methodologically speaking, there have been a lot of works on this. Let's say, I'll give you a few examples, including one of mine. There is something called comparative film studies. We just had a film scholar in the room, she just left. Or the idea of comparative textual media done by Catherine Hales and Jessica Pressman. Comparative textual media, of course, once again, comes from perspective of electronic literature to talk about how literature must move beyond the idea of print. That is one of the fundamental considerations in that piece of work. And then myself and Professor Astrid Enslin, we give this idea about electronic literatures as post-comparative media, where we reroute ourselves in the whole idea of identity politics and placing ourselves within the field. Is that how I access the field, how I come across the field, is how I fundamentally define it. However, that is not something that I will be directly engaging with here. That happens to be the methodology of my thesis. Okay, now this is what is called as the tree and the wave metaphors, where we is building towards distant reading as an analytic, as a method, right? So what are the trees and waves? What are the tree and wave model, right? Now the trees and waves are both metaphors. Of course they are. But except for this, they have absolutely nothing in common. The tree describes passage from unity to diversity. One tree with many branches from Indo-European to dozens of different languages. The wave is the opposite. It observes uniformity engulfing an initial diversity. As you saw earlier, that how he talks about world literature being a system of differences, a system of variations. This is how he explains the variations. So, Hollywood films conquering one market after another, or English swallowing language after language, right? So that is the wave model of how something is engulfed, something is flattened by a wave, right? Trees, however, on the other hand, need geographical discontinuity in order to branch off from each other. Languages must be separated in space, just like animal species. Waves, however, dislike barriers, of course, and thrive on geographical continuity. If I give you the result of the tree model, so in a tree model, you see something starts from here and then it branches off. You can obviously question, does it need to start there? You can question it, you can criticize the point of genesis. Of course you can do that. But I just give you an example of the novel form, how it so apparently emerged in France, and then in England, and then in India, and in all of the other places. Well, obviously, it's not a teleology that I'm trying to draw here, obviously, but as you can see, the tree model, how it starts in a sense of unity, and then it diversifies as it moves on. Waves dislike barriers, obviously it does. Trees and branches are what nation-states cling to. Nation-state as a political factor, obviously. Waves are what markets do. So if you look at the construction of nation-states, in terms of policy, for example, India as a nation-state is inherently multilingual in its existence. So you will see a lot of political dialogues and discourses about how apparently multilingual we are. So obviously, as a matter of policy, the tree metaphor is something that nation-states claim to in terms of international relations. But markets do the exact opposite. Markets need a sense of uniformity. Markets need you to buy certain things that other people are buying so that it agrees with the capitalist logic. But they both work. As you can see, these are not binary concepts. These are adjacent concepts. These work together. Cultural history is made of trees and waves. At the same time, there is assimilation of differences, and at the same time, there is diversification away. Yes, the Hollywood film genre conquering one market of the other is a trope that you can study, that you can analyze for your term papers. Sure, Hollywood market a cultural industry as a factor. Let's take the example of the Western genre, how it has defined action films across cultures for years and years, right? But it is because of the dominance of the Western genre. In India, we have had a cult classic like Sholay that kind of imitates the Western, but it does so in a way that is inherently Indian. So you can make the argument that yes, there are things, the market, the capitalist logics that thrive on the sense of unity and flattening of differences. But human tendencies and cultural tendencies go the opposite way, that whenever there is a dominance of a factor, the counter is the resistance of variation. And I just give you an example of how that occurs. So cultural history, if you're looking at the history of culture, and this culture can be anything. It can be the culture of cinema, it can be the culture of literature, it can be the culture of music, dance, anything. So they are made of trees and waves. They are a tale of differences and similarities and dominances and resistances. So this is another fundamentally important concept where he actually starts building into the idea of distant reading. This is what he very dramatically he calls the slaughterhouse of literature. How world literature becomes a slaughterhouse for literature. How does this operate? Let me take a breath. Let me begin with a few titles. Arabian Nights, Alzheimer's, Aniline, whatever, and then he goes on for, and then you see Arabian Nights somewhere. How many of these names do you recognize, other than Arabian Tales, Arabian Nights, and so on and so forth? Do you recognize any other name other than these two? Any of these texts you have read? Maybe not. That's what he says. It was the first page of an 1845 catalogue, Columbell's circulating library catalogue that was in Derby. This was the first page of the works that was published in 1845. None of them are remembered now, only other than one or two. A small collection of the kind that wanted only successful books. So please remember, these is the list of the successful books. So there are unsuccessful books that are not here. Within the successful books, we don't know 99% of these books. So history is a slaughterhouse of culture that is by definition operates in an act of forgetting. But today, only a couple of titles still ring familiar, your Arabian Nights and Arabian Tales. The others, nothing, they are gone. The history of the world is a slaughterhouse of the world. He reads a famous Hegelian aphorism. If you know about your Hegelian conceptualizations of history, otherwise I will not go into all of that because I myself don't know it so well. The history of the world is a slaughterhouse of the world, which means that it eliminates things, it forgets things as it moves on. We forget things as we move on. We don't remember everything that happened yesterday. Of course not. And of literature. The majority of books disappear forever, and the majority actually misses the point. That means when we are looking at world literature, we are eliminating the majority that has disappeared. If we set today's canon of 19th century British novels at 200 titles, which is a very high figure. You cannot imagine a course on British literature with 200 novels. It will take your entire degree, and even then the course will not get over. That would only be 0.5% of all published novels. Not even that. What about the other 99.5% then? This is the question behind this article, Distant Reading fundamentally. What about the slaughterhouse? What about the forgotten texts, right? The question behind this article and behind the larger idea of literary history that is now taking shape in the critics that he mentions. The difference that is, for me, the aim is not so much as a change in the canon, the discovery of precursors or the canon alternatives to it to be restored to a prominent position. As in a change how we look at all of literary history. Obviously, he is making a utopic claim that is it possible to look at all of literary history at once, everything that has been published forever, which is an impossible goal, yes. But can we do that? To do so, I focus on what I call rivals. This is where he starts giving his idea of distant reading as to how he formulates it. But he goes into a type of analysis which I don't find very helpful, but I will still talk a little bit about it. But as you can understand, that this, fundamentally this, I have given the picture of a Nazi book burning, but you can perhaps understand the metaphor that I'm alluding to here. How history in itself, because it functions on forgetting, operates as a metaphorical book burner. Time is the biggest slaughterhouse of literature, culture, everything. So what he calls rivals, and we will discuss this a little further, so I hope you can understand how he is building to the idea of distant reading. That why do we need softwares, why do we need number crunching to read literature? What is the purpose of it? So that we can figure in a broader perspective. Now the problem that 99% scholars have a tendency of making when they are in the process of training is that they take 5 texts written by Jane Austen, they feed it to a software, they calculate the number of pronouns and the number of nouns, and they create a graph and they are happy. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but that's not what distant reading is about. That is how you can train to do distant reading. That is how you can train yourself in methods of analysis, but that is what you can do better than the machine. Right? The point of distant reading is not to eliminate close reading. The point of distant reading is to take a lot of data, read it very closely, and then map it. Right? For example, if you look at the entire canon of literature, let's say you look at 500 novels and then you feed it to a software and then it gives you a certain response and then you'd infer something from it. You look at how things have changed. You look at how certain words have been used. For example, let's say if you go to Google Ngram is a tool that you can use to see how much a word has been used across time. And let's say if you type the word skibidi in Google, in Ngram, you will not find the word skibidi being used in 1945, right? So that's what it is supposed to do. It is supposed to trace a certain thing, a usage of a certain thing across time. But that doesn't mean you cannot possibly use distant reading for reading 1 or 2 texts. The idea of this lecture, of this guest talk, was born at IIT Dhanbad a couple of months ago, when me and Dr. Paulomidas were attending a workshop by my good friend Sophia Sahiwala, who is a PhD scholar at IIT Dhanbad. So we were doing a workshop on ant conch, and which is something that I will talk about a little later. And she had a very fundamental question. She whispered into my ears and said, "What the hell are we doing? That why are we taking literary texts and why are we boiling it down to numbers?" And that is when I started giving a bit of started selling myself a little bit in her ears, and I started telling her that this is what all that business is about. But you can also do distant reading with texts. For example, what text we were doing? We were doing Jane Eyre and Wide Sargasso Sea, right? So if you know, Wide Sargasso Sea has a connection with Jane Eyre. What is the connection? Can you please say that for the audience? Yes. Exactly. So what I decided to do, just as a fun experiment, I did not know that it would yield anything. I took the pronoun her, H-E-R. I took the pronoun her, and as an input, I gave the samples of Jane Eyre, White Sargasso Sea, uploaded the entire corpus into this system, into this software called AntConc. I'll give you an example after this. And it showed me, it gave me a graph of the density of the use of her in the entire novel. And something that I saw was fascinating is that the places, the clusters of the pronoun her in Jane Eyre is the exact opposite in White Sargasso Sea. So White Sargasso Sea was written at least 100 years after Jane Eyre, if not more, right? So 100 years later, in a response text to 1960s, and Jane Eyre, of course, is a Victorian text, right? So the usage of pronouns is absolutely the opposite in White Sargasso Sea. Now, if, as you might... Yes, of course. I'll do that when I show the example in the second half. Sorry about that. Yeah. So what I mean absolutely the opposite is that when you calculate the number of pronouns that have appeared in a text, and when you map it, in the mapping, it gives you a graphical representation that it goes like this. It's a normal graph, right? So if your Jane Eyre goes like this, then Sargasso Sea goes like this. So the crests and troughs are alternate. It's fascinating to look at. I'll show you how AntConc works in just a moment. I just have 1 or 2 slides with some of the computational stuff that I have done. So that is what you can do, but that is highly advisable not to, because that is something that you can do as a research paper, but people who claim to do that as a part of the thesis need to be a little bit more rigorous, because that demands a certain form of deeper engagement. And that is a temptation that has to be resisted. Because yes, the machine will help you, but then where is your ideology, where is your groundwork, where is your framework, and all of that question. Okay, now the rival model that he is giving here, it's a bit funny, but of course there is a problem here. Of course, there's a lot of problems in Moretti's typology. Knowing 200 novels is already difficult, but 20,000, it's nearly impossible. How can we do it? What does knowledge mean in this new scenario? One thing for sure, it cannot mean the very close reading of very few texts. So if you claim, so-called, you claim to be an expert in world literature, that many of us do, then our knowledge of world literature is based on, I don't know, 100, 200 texts, which may or may not be embarrassing, but he is giving you a proposition. You can fully disagree. You can absolutely raise your hand up and say that this is the human agent is capable of doing that. So that is what is supposed to be considered as an experience, which is very valid an argument, right? It's a secularized theology, really, a canon, which is obviously close reading of how many texts can you close read, that has radiated from the cheerful town of New Haven over the whole field of literary studies. A larger literary history requires other skills. Now this is where he comes into his idea. Sampling, statistics, work with series, titles, concordances. So I was talking about AntConc. The full form of AntConc is Anthony Concordance. Anthony, nothing deep there. Anthony is the name of the person who made it, and concordance is the function of calculating the frequency of words. So Anthony has created a concordance software. You shorten it down, it becomes AntConc. Okay? It sounds very cool. Incipits and perhaps also the trees that I discuss in this essay, but perhaps a brief premise. Now this is where he talks about this graphical representation that he has done. Now as you can see, in this analysis, he has taken the example of detective novels that have been published from 1891 to 1900, some samples, and he has boiled the novel down into the presence of clues. If you are reading detective novels, the idea of clues are something that is very important to a detective novel, that how can you deduce the clues, blah, blah, blah. So it says that clues are absent, clues are evoked, there are symptoms of the clues, they are present but not necessarily, necessary but not visible, visible but not decodable, and decodable. So this is the typology that he creates, and he takes a sample of detective novels and he creates a representation of how the clues are present across these novels. Now, sure, whatever he is doing a fine job at it. But as you may realize, you may or may not have realized, if you look at that graph, the trend of clues in detective novels from 1891 to 1990, he is talking about distant reading, he is talking about world literature, he is talking about reading everything. But can you point out a fundamental flaw in what's happening over there? It's okay if you can't. But if you look at that construction, if you look at that as a possible method of analyzing literature, what can be a possible problem? Yes. Yes, of course. I completely agree with you. But that is a very important point. But in this example that he is giving here, in this type of construction, do you see any flaw in that construction? Because he is talking about a certain utopic identification of world literature, where we are reading everything, where we are considering everything. So where the problem is the human reader, because the human reader can read so little. So if the human reader is the problem, then do you see the intervention of the human somewhere in this graph? Of course, that is very evident. But in this typology is what I mean. Yeah. So if you can see this whole business of absence, presence, evocation, blah, 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 blah. This is the typology that he has himself created. He has himself created these typologies, and then he is himself analyzing the data, he is himself putting the data, he is saying that, oh, this is absent, this is present, this is absent, this is present, and he is creating a graph out of his own mind. Yes. The computer is helping with the representation, right? Yeah, exactly. The flaw here is that because he is talking about supposed broadening of literary studies, he is himself interpreting the broadening. That is the paradox of the broadening. If you're talking about broadening, if you're talking about broadening the canon, if you're talking about taking 20,000 novels, and then your example of looking at that is this, then there is a problem with that construction. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely, you are absolutely correct, and this is what in order to remove the human, he is making it more humanistic by making these assumptions that you have rightly pointed out. So, so therefore, the question becomes that this is not a project that deals with either extremes. This is not a project of removing the human agent from your method of analysis. Neither is this a project about defending literary studies from the shackles of technology. It is about engaging with it critically. It is about understanding what works and what does not work. If you want to make broad claims about how writing, because people in literary studies write papers like this, the changing course of Victorian literature. Somebody, just 1 minute. The changing course of Victorian literature, they write a monograph. And the monograph examines one novel by Dickens, one novel by Bronte, and one novel by somebody else, and that's the end of the book. So that can be perhaps a problem, is what he is saying. Then maybe we can start by looking at a broader corpus, narrow it down, and then we can do our close reading business. Yes, you had a question. That is his own reading. Yeah. Yeah, that is a very big problem because this is a very yeah, exactly. So it's a very funny incident that also we were taught when we did digital humanities is that so I can't really use expletives here, but I will try to explain what that debate is. So there is something in book history that we now known as the long S. Does anybody know what a long S looks like? It looks like an F. Okay, so sorry about this. If you write the word SUCK, uh, if you make a machine read it, it reads FUCK. So if you ask Google Ngram to give you a graph of SUCK and FUCK, you will see that a lot of manuscripts in the 13th centuries are writing so much expletives, and you're like, my God, are these people crazy? Why are they cursing so much? Why are people in the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries cursing so much? And then you realize that the machine can't differentiate between the long S and F because the letter S has changed across history, and the machine, the OCR, optical character recognition, is unable to recognize that. So for them, SUCK and FUCK are the same thing. Yeah. How much time do we have? Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, sure. Okay, so after all of the theoretical business that we engaged in thus far, the question becomes, are all distant loves labors lost then? So there are a few examples that I will give you. One of them, we are maybe familiar of this thing here. This is yeah. So this is Voyant. Voyant developed and introduced to us by two scholars called Jeffrey Rockwell and Jeremy Sinclair. Jeremy Sinclair tragically passed away a few years ago, and Jeffrey Rockwell was roaming around India a few months ago. So we had the good fortune of interacting with him when we were in Dhanbad. So this is Voyant, and this is what Voyant does. Now, as you can see, here we have the text of a history play from Shakespeare, and this is something that is known as a word cloud. This is, sorry, not history, Love's Labour's Lost. And this is the word cloud. How many of you remember the old days of Facebook? The early 2010s Facebook, that we used to give our data to profiles, and they used to come up with what words have you used the most, and then they used to create graphs like this. I think some people do, some people maybe don't. So that is basically word cloud. That's Voyant for you right there. That is basically, it reads your corpus and it shows the presence of certain words, or even if not words, certain lemmas that you can tell the system that, consider this as one entity. That if I say, hello, how are you, you can consider it as separate words, but I can also consider hello, how are you as just one entity, and I can ask the machine, hello, how are you, how many times does it appear? So that is also one thing we can do. This is the frequency, the relative frequency of these words across the texts. This is primarily what Voyant does. Voyant gives you very interesting word clouds. You can do a lot of fancy visualization with Voyant, visualization being the key here. I will come to qualitative coding in a little bit. And this is AntConc, as you can see. Can you see? No. So this is basically AntConc. As you can see, this is the whole keyword search, and you can see that these are the ranks of how many times that they are used, and there's a lot of other functions that are happening here. You can compare different manuscripts. AntConc is a little bit more powerful than Voyant. AntConc does a lot of different stuff. Now, it's important to talk about another temptation in digital humanities. It's what we call the temptation of tools. is that when we do digital humanities, we are very tempted to learn tools. I am from an IIT, and our IIT has this master's course in digital humanities. Now, students who come for master's courses, they're very enthusiastic in learning different concepts, different tools, and this and that. While learning about tools and your Pythons and your Jupyter notebooks is great, it's fantastic, but you need to understand why you are learning that in the first place. What do you want to do with it? I'll give you another example of another software after this. But it's very important to know what you will and what you can do with this. But it is also important to know certain basics of these tools. Right in the vicinity at IIT Delhi, we have somebody called Professor Arjun Ghosh. Professor Arjun Ghosh is the person to go to for tools training. If people here are interested, you can follow up on Professor Arjun Ghosh's work. A few days ago, there was a workshop. Oh, nice. Winter school in digital humanities. I wanted to be a part of that workshop, but Arjunda said that leave it for the people who are coming. So it's like, okay, I sit on the floor, but still not allowed. So this is what we do. So the temptation of tools is something that we must encounter, because one of the problems that digital humanities faces as a field in India right now is that people think that they're going to come, they're going to learn certain tools, learn to do basics and bits and bobs of programming, and actually take engineering core jobs in the market. Never going to happen. Please understand your place in the job market. You must understand what your function in the job market is and what you can do, and most importantly, you must understand what you cannot do. So you must cultivate your skills, knowing what your limitations are and knowing how you can cultivate yourselves and make yourselves better, right? So this is another example. Which text is this? Any guesses? Yeah, Canterbury Tales. So this is Canterbury Tales, to no one's surprise. Very interesting, very controversial in terms of a middle-age text, very lewd for the people who have read it. So what is the difference between this and that? Yes? Middle English. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, it's still Middle English though. Still Middle English. Yeah, sure. The letters are modern, you can say that. Other than that, what are the differences? The most apparent answers that you have are probably the right ones. Footnoting, great. Yes. Sorry? The image, the visuality of it? Yes, the visuality of it. Very, very important, the visuality of it. Okay, so as you can see that this is a text that was written, illustrated at one point of time, and then they were copied by manual copiers because there was no reproduction business happening at that point of time yet. Scribes used to manually copy these scripts, right? So now we have reached a point where we have our Penguin classics, where we have the original language, where we have the modern language, and we can read it. But certain things are lost. Of course, the visuality, the rich imagery is lost, but other than that, a little finer element of the text gets lost. How can we preserve it? How can we visualize it? Is something that I will show you. That this is perhaps one example of how distant reading can be applied as a concept. Let me introduce you to something called, does anybody have can anybody want to take a guess as to what software is being used here? HTML, you're close, it looks like HTML, but I'm sorry, it's not. No. Sorry, no. No, not Python. It looks like code, yes. No. This is called Textual Encoding Initiative. This is what we know as TEI. This is a software that is specifically designed to encode text. Now, what do I mean when we say encoding text? Now, as you can see that all of this that is on top of the screen here, it's very, very difficult to read. Right, because number one, it's written in a style that is not familiar to us. It's written in a language unfamiliar to us. But it also uses a lot of shortcuts that is unfamiliar to us. Now, why do I know all this? Because I had the great privilege of working in the Canterbury Tales project for across a year. I have, this is what we did in the project. This is called digitizing. We used to collate the manuscripts. I'll tell you a little bit about it. So I remember the first time when, I'll just give you a brief of what we used to do. So we used to read these entire pages, line by line, and then read the code line by line. And tell me if you notice that this is the third line, right? Yes. If you look at the first line, do you see a huge W in the first line? Yeah? What does it say in the first line here? It says HI rend, and then it says ORNC, which is the code for ornate representation, and then it says W, which is of course the big huge W over there, and then the line, the code line closes, the HI, the block closes, and then it says HAN, which is written in the first line, HAN. So WAN, right? So that is how we tell the system that, hey, listen, the W is important here. That's how we tell the system that the W is important here. So we had this guideline that when you see an ornate letter, this is the code you copy, this is you paste, and you keep the letter W as an ornate text. And now, as you can see that there are a lot of squiggly marks across the text. There are bits and bobs happening, pins and pomps happening all over there. And you can see that there are all these green lines. These are lines of texts. These are what we call as scribal shortcuts, right? So when these scribes used to write, they used to copy these texts. They did not write the whole of the words. So the texting shortcut language is not an invention of the last decade or so. It has been there forever, shortcuts in language, right? So as you can see, this is where to, right? But if you see the manuscript, I'm sorry the fourth line is not visible, it's V like this, and then there is an apostrophe, and then there is to. That means where to. So how do we know, how do we tell the manuscript when we are creating an edition like this? We are not only missing out on the graphic part, but we are also missing out on the scribal shortcuts, the apostrophes, the marks, this thing and that. So how do we tell the system that, you know, V apostrophe TU means VERTU, and when you see the manuscripts, you see V apostrophe TU, and then you say expand, and it expands into VERTU. That's how we do it. Every single line by hand you encode. Like this, you copy bits and bobs of code, and you put it in over there. So as you can see, this is a different type, this is a different form of reading that is happening here. And as you can see, that here also we have notes, different types of notes. As you can see, note, place, margin, this. Okay, so there are codes for everything. If you want to see the Canterbury Tales project, it is currently led by Barbara Bordalejo, and it was initially founded by Peter Robinson. It's hosted at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. So please take a look. It's a fascinating project. There is an app in Google Play Store called the Cant app, which has the entirety of the general prologue of the Canterbury Tales. So please go and take a look. Now, I remember the first time I had read this, I read one page, I had transcribed one page, And I started crying because it is so overwhelming. It is incredibly straining on your eyes to read all this and to pluck out every single thing and just code it like that. One controversial scholar made a statement that I can encode the entirety of Canterbury Tales without having read a single line of Canterbury Tales. So you understand what it means, right? You don't know the narrative, you don't know the story, you don't know who Chaucer was, but you are doing the encoding. You can do that. But obviously Barbara got really defensive. How can you say that? How can you not read Chaucer and how can you work on Canterbury Tales project? You can. Theoretically you can. Now, what does distant reading have to do with all of this business? Let's see. Now, this is what we call as collation. Now, as you can understand, that there are multiple scribes who were employed at these royal courts who their duty was to copy. All right? Now, in the act of copying, there will be mistakes. That means that no two manuscripts are the same. Now, can we create a digital edition that will incorporate every single of these manuscriptal variations? That is what the Canterbury Tales project does. That is what I did for a year. So, okay, see this beautiful ornate page? And this is the phylogeny of Canterbury Tales. I'll explain to you what it means. You look at this beautiful graph over here. Now, can anybody tell me what this represents? Any idea? Huh? Yes, yes. Do you see any patterns here? Yes, yes. Yes. Yeah. Huh. Huh, yeah, so the center thing is something that I want to point out. It looks like there is a center, but there is not. These are the connections that make you think that there is a center. There isn't. Now, phylogenetic as a concept obviously is borrowed from genetics and biology and all of that. But here what we do is to see all of these nodes that you see, they are the representation of every single manuscript and every single version of manuscripts, okay? Now, if you see that the ones in blue, they are pretty tight. They're pretty close by. These are the ones, the people who are closest to Chaucer. Which is why the mistakes in copying are the least. Which is why within this graph you can see how it shows, how it represents, how it visualizes the data that is present, that I was showing you how we did all of that business. And you can see that there is one random person here who's far away from everybody, doesn't talk to any other manuscripts, far away. Now, the story is that there was this French monarch who didn't understand English very properly, but who wanted to copy the Canterbury Tales so bad that he ended up making a world of mistakes. That is that manuscript. That is so far because it has made so many mistakes that it can't be compared with other manuscripts. It's for the representation is off. Now, that is how we take a text, we use it, we read it, we collate it, and then we visualize it. These are the different processes of working on a digital project. So you understand the nuances and the whole rigor that is involved in a project like this. Peter Robinson started this project. This project is still going on. As you can understand, it's a mammoth project, right? Now, obviously, then comes the question of infrastructure, then comes the question of grant funding, then comes the question of collaboration, that do we have the people, the power, the money to run a project like this, to get permission from the libraries to use these manuscripts in the first place. We can digitize these, we can do OCR, we can do all of it, but half of the Indian languages don't have OCR in the first place. Okay, once again, going back to Arjun Ghosh's work, he is coming up with something called Lipikar, which is the OCR for majority of Indian languages. I see two people nodding their heads vigorously because they are familiar with Arjun sir's work. All right, now this is where I'm coming towards the end. This is the visualization of what was previously known as Twitter, now has become a graveyard thanks to someone we know, we may not name. So this is the graveyard of previous Twitter as it used to be, and this is a representation of Twitter DH, of how DH Twitter looked like in 2014, 2013, right? And this is, once again, as you can see, it's a network. It's a network of different organizations, different people, and so on and so forth. Now, as you can see, these white dots, they represent the English-speaking DH community. The blue ones are the French, the yellow ones are the German, and the red ones are Spanish. Now, seeing these, you can understand how networking creates coteries and closets. We keep speaking about networking and elitism and bias and coterie formation and elitism. You can visualize it. You can literally visualize it, and you can see how sections may or may not talk to each other because of different barriers. You can do the same for if you have the required data in terms of class, caste, gender positions as well, especially in terms of academia, in terms of cultural capital as well. So this is what we do, and this is a very fascinating paper. This is called Mapping DH Twitter by Martin Grandjean, and I call it a very English singularity. One of these scholars who I have had the great fortune of working with is Quinn Dombrowski. She is a library technologist at Stanford. So she's very, very vocal about multilingualism in digital humanities, and how if we are doing DH in English, we should acknowledge that we are doing DH in English and not assume that we are doing DH in English. So this person, Mr. H.G. Wells, wrote this funny little story called The World Brain. I don't know if any of you are aware of this little short story, and are you aware of this documentary called Google and the World Brain? So this documentary, The Google and the World Brain, is about the controversy of Google Books. How Google Books was trying to digitize books, and there was a huge copyright hassle and all of that. It's a fascinating documentary available on YouTube for free, so please watch it. And here comes the beast lurking around this talk, ChatGPT. Now what ChatGPT does is it learns itself on the data that is available in the market, and then it regurgitates information from it. So, yeah, he did tell us that it's going to happen, but yeah, it did, right? So basically, Google and the World Brain borrows from the short story World Brain, where it imagines that the World Brain has this brain that has everything, every information about everybody. So yeah, we are hypothetically, we are reaching that point of the uncanny valley, as the psychoanalysts will tell you. So what does ChatGPT do? Now, I am not an expert of prompt engineering or AI by any stretch of the imagination. I am a digital humanist, and I do it as much as I can, as much as my humanist training enables me to. So what does ChatGPT do? Yes. Yes, please. Mm-hmm. 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 Absolutely. So what I have been doing thus far is to give you examples of how working with humanistic data in literary studies work. So first, what Moretti does, what he tries to do. I don't think he succeeds a lot, but that's what he tries. And then I showed you Voyant, what you can do, bits and bobs with Voyant, with Anthony Concordance, and all of that, how you can engage in word processing, visualizing data. And then a very specific example of digitizing archival data with TEI, and then combining all the two, that when we have digitized machine-readable data, then you enter the realm of generative data. So once you have data that is machine readable, then you have data that the machine can generate. So once you upload the data in a system, then that data is machine readable, then the machine can be trained using that data to generate data. Let's say somebody is digitizing Chaucer, and that data is fed into a system, and the system learns how Chaucer writes like. And then you say that I ate something in the morning and I did not like it. Can you explain it to me like Chaucer would? It will give you something. So that are the possibilities. But these are different types of examples. These are different types of possibilities that can happen when you work with humanistic data. To answer your next question, can I please ask you about your background? What's your training, ma'am? Huh. I assume that you have worked with interviews, ethnography, and so on and so forth. So qualitative coding is something that you must be one of your fortes, right? So let's say you are working with Atlas TI. And let's say you have transcripts of interviews and you are coding the interviews, right? You do all of that and then you create a representation out of it and then you visualize it. So imagine distant reading as something like this, replace the interviews with literary texts. So what you do in those interviews, when you are coding those interviews, is that you ascribe emotions to the interview responses, right? That you code them with certain facets. That is, once again, that is your positionality, that you give a positionality statement in the social sciences and you say, why are you coding the way you are coding it, right? So imagine doing the same, but for a novel, in order to visualize it, right? So it's a bit similar, right? But once again, as a sociologist, when you are doing something, you have to clarify your positional bias. You need to make sure that the questionnaire that you are designing does not have leading questions, right? But what happens in literary studies research is that sometimes when we are engaging with humanistic data-based experiments like these, we forget the role of the human agent, which is what I showed with the detective novel and the typology business, that when you are saying that, okay, I have clues, but you yourself has identified those clues in the first place. So that was my general point. I hope I was able to answer. Yeah. Oh, yeah. In this slide? Here? Yes. So first of all, there is the difference of authorial intent, that who is doing this work and how are they making a choice to show the results. If somebody is deciding to write something, it is a choice that they are making. If somebody is deciding to make a graph, that is a choice that they are making. That is why somebody might tell a story by making a film, somebody might tell a story by doing a comic book. So it's something similar, that how you decide to show the information that you have. However, when you have so much information to process and to show, which is why visualization comes in handy as a tactic, which is then followed on by explanations. So it's not like this or that, it's like this complements that. Yes, please. Hello. Yeah, please. Yeah. So TEI is the affordance of the software that is used to digitize. So because it has these uh, systems in place where you can encode a manuscript, you can do all sorts of, you can tell the manuscript, oh, here we have an ornate letter W, here we have a note, here we have a shortcut. So when it'll give you a machine readable version, it will give you two versions. It will give you the version with the shortcuts, shortcuts and the ornate letters and the footnotes as they were in the manuscript, and it will also give you a general version which is expanded. So you have the flexibility of choice. So what print culture, what it does to some point is that it risks the idea of flattening. Is that once it's printed, it's printed. So one of the advantages of the digital medium is that it gives you the option for a sense of non-linearity. Is that you can see two versions of the manuscript as it existed. Because if you look at how these manuscripts were copied by scribes in the first place, these were also not static texts. They were copied by multiple people and they made multiple mistakes that led to there being a lot of variance in these types of texts, right? So I think some part of that is being talked about here, that what TEI can do. So yeah, I don't know if I answered any of your question. Should I proceed? Okay. I'm almost done. No, I'm not really depending on the slides. I'm almost done. It's just that I had that chat GPT graphic. So that is, I think. I think I can take a few questions meanwhile, if there are more questions. Yeah, maybe. Mic is still working, yeah. 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 Of course, of course. Absolutely not. Hammer home. Yeah. I would not even say supplement, I would say replace. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Which is what the process of my next slide was, is that what ChatGPT enables us to do is, if we go back to the whole idea of Socratic dialogue and all of that, it actually enables us to return to a basic function of engaging in humanities dialogue, which is ask questions. Because all of what we have been doing for years and years and years is that somebody is asking us questions and we are giving answers. But what generative models have enabled us to do is to perfect the art of asking questions. That is what prompt engineering is. You ask a question and then it gives you answers. So the better questions you ask, the better answers you get. But the thing is, how well are you trained in the art of asking questions? So that is what your humanities and your philosophy and your all of the liberal arts training that will enable you to do. It will give you the biggest toolkit, the biggest skill set that is not listed in any job listing, is the critical thinking. that it will enable you with the superpower of asking questions. Unless and until you know how to ask questions, no generative system in the world will give you answers. And I think that is a point that, because even in the job market, as all of you will know better than me, that prompt engineering as a skill set is the new hot cake of the industry right now. That everybody needs that, even if you are doing content writing or something like that. So you can only engineer prompts when you know how to write prompts. And in order to write prompts, you need to think, engage with your subject matter at hand. So I think, yeah, so that is what my whole point of the last slide was about. Even if the power doesn't come on, I think I have made my point fairly. And my slides can be shared, of course. So I'll just give you a brief of what the last slide was about. So what ChatGPT does, can anybody give me the full form of ChatGPT, by the way? We all say ChatGPT, but what does GPT mean? Anybody? Close, close, very close. And very educated guess, I might add. Yeah. So what he did was he predicted based on his learning. That is exactly what ChatGPT does. So the full form of ChatGPT is generative pre-trained transformer. So generative pre-trained transformer. That tells you a lot of what you need to know about ChatGPT. Is that you feed it information and then it makes an educated guess, just like you did. So you had certain informations and you made a prediction. You made a conclusion. That's exactly what it does. Now, as you might think, that what predictions you make is dependent on your own knowledge that you have. There lies the question of bias. So there is someone called Joy Bulawamini who leads a project called the Algorithmic Justice League, which fights racism in AI. If you are interested in things like that, please check out Joy Bulawamini's work. There is a documentary called Coded Bias. Please take a look at it. She also has a TED Talk. Her work is absolutely fascinating. I am not an AI person. Yes, are you saying something? Joy Bulawamini. You can write Coded Bias and it will pop up. She is a researcher from MIT. Yes, MIT, right. So Joy's work is absolutely fascinating. Please look at that. And Algorithmic Justice League. I know it's a very dramatic name, but yeah, it is what it is. Because there has been a lot of racist examples of AI. You give it a brown person, a black person's face, it says, oh, this is an animal. It's not a something. That's not a favorable outcome. So that is, yes. Yes, you're absolutely correct. So class, caste, gender, ability, everything forms into the discourse. All of the biases, all of the assumptions that we make are the assumptions that the system makes, simply because the system is trained on the data that people in power have. And people in power have the data of the population in power. Yeah. So in all of these generative AI models, Claude, Apple Intelligence, ChatGPT, whatever you call it, this is very funny because the tech industry promises a utopic solution for everything. All the socialist and the gender politics are unnecessary. Things like that. You were seeing it happen in front of your eyes in the US, and so on and so forth. They spend hundreds and millions of dollars to prevent these language models from becoming rabidly racist. That's that. Years ago, Microsoft or somebody else created a Twitter bot. Twitter bots are now dead, by the way. Those of you know Twitter bots, bless you. Twitter bots are now dead. So the Twitter bot was meant as an organic interactive thing with the internet. Within 2 days, it started defending Hitler. And the bot was taken down by Microsoft instantly. You might have seen the very viral ad where it says, where it identifies Serena Williams' face as a monkey. So yeah, I know, trigger warning, I'm sorry about that, but that is what generative AI can do if it is unregulated. So regulation of generative models, regulation of artificial intelligence is extremely important, because the intelligence, you can claim that is artificial intelligence, but it is human knowledge, right, that is being generated. So if we look at the steps of how data is collected by ChatGPT and how the results are given, by the way, there's a very important article from one of the most overtly cited philosophers of our day, Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky has an article called The False Promise of ChatGPT that came out from the New York Times, if I'm not wrong. So please read that article. It's a very important article, no matter how much we would like to say that Chomsky doesn't know anything about AI. It's a great article, because what it inherently posits is that ChatGPT is nothing but the greatest plagiarizer of our times, which is true. That it just takes data done by other people, and then it does that. I might be slightly wrong. Of all people, Anil Kapoor filed a case that his voice can't be used without his permission. Because you might have seen Cristiano Ronaldo singing songs in Hindi on Instagram, right? So what is that? That is generative AI, right? But you can't use someone's likeness without their permission. Right now, we knew about images, we knew about writing, but now the element of likeness, voice, gestures, everything comes into the picture with generative models. So yeah, these things are important to think about. These things are important to keep in mind when constructing your arguments. It's very important to engage with it. Because there are just 1 minute. There are two sides of this debate. One part of the people, they are hell-bent on discarding AI, that no, we are not going to engage with AI. AI consumes a lot of water, it is harmful for the environment, blah, 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 shut it down, goodbye. That is slightly problematic, because we can't escape the things. As humanists, it is our responsibility to engage with emergent technology. And on the other side, there is a technocratic imagination that AI is here to solve everything, which is also not true. So a critical viewpoint is important, which is why you need to have your critical thinking hats on and engage with emergent pieces of technology. So should I finish? Yeah, I'm done. I was just engaging, because should I wait? So okay. So yeah. So what does ChatGPT do? A prompt is sampled from the database. Then a labeler demonstrates the desired output behavior. So there is the human agent. And this data is used to fine-tune the GPT model with supervised learning. So as you can see, that even these models are supervised by human output, who says that, oh, this output is better than that output. Very Orwellian if you think about it. Some outputs are equal, but all outputs are equal, but some outputs are more equal than other outputs, right? That is where your racism and your biases come into play. And in my last slide, I had a very dramatic image of a Bengali filmmaker called Ritik Ghatak, who has a very important statement called Bhabo Bhaba Practice Karo, which means think, practice thinking. At this day and age, it is more than important than ever to engage with the forgotten concept of critical thinking, no matter how much nation states try to erode that concept from our curriculum. So that is where I would like to end. Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the organization. Thank you. Oh, yeah, sure. Always. I can talk about it in my sleep at this point, which is very toxic attachment, if you ask me. So my work is on electronic literature. So what I basically look at is how electronic literature has emerged as a marginalized form of practice within the marginalized discipline of English literary studies in India. So what I do is basically I showed you the post-comparative chapter, that is my methodology, where I lay out the business of identifying myself in the field, positioning myself, my privileges, my biases, and that is how I conduct my historiography of the field. And then I position myself as a literary studies scholar, and I conduct a study of how literary studies has changed over the ages, you know, with the pre-colonial ideas of the producing the ideal civil servant, the native aspiration of learning English as a language, the missionary goals of propagating English with the cultural capital thing, and then with independence, the influx of translation studies. One of the, I believe that there are a lot of people from JNU here without any surprise, that Meenakshi Mukherjee has written extensively about the politics of including Indian writers and translations. In 80s, there was a huge problem finding proper translations of Indian texts, but now in 2020, all we have are translations. There's more translators than writers. Sorry. Yeah.
Since we have students who are about to graduate, maybe could you briefly tell us about the master's program at IIT Kanpur? So one of our graduates, Anya Chadha, was among the first people to
Yes.
join the
Yes.
program.
Yeah.
So could you tell
So
us about that?
Anya was one of our, I have had the pleasure of teaching their batch. Anya was one of the most brilliant students that we have ever had. She was a philosophy major, and she did her MSc in digital humanities. If Anya, you're watching the recording, hi. Another of your alumni is currently joined. Her name is Manya Khanna. I don't know if she's there. I saw her in the meeting room sometimes previously. The course that Anya was doing was MSc in Digital Humanities. Now, this is also an argument that I make in another paper of mine, that you have digital humanities being taught in various different ways across various different universities. If you go to, let's say, Jadavpur, Jadavpur does a certificate course in what it calls as digital humanities and cultural informatics. So it has a lot to do with archiving, databases, data sets, and so on and so forth. If you come to IIT Jodhpur, it has an MSc in digital humanities. It's an MSc, remember. So it has people from computer science, engineering, and mathematics teach you Python in your first semester, and the students cry so much. Yeah, and then you have people from management teach you digital marketing. So the interdisciplinary perspectives are more, but also, well, the struggle for, uh, we have power, the struggle is also more. But IIT Dhanbad has an MA in digital humanities, which is similar, but the degree is that of an MA. So you can obviously question the politics of an MA and an MSc. If you go into the private spaces, let's say Flame has faculties like Mayurakshi Chaudhary, Maya Dodd, who engage in digital humanities, digital history, computational sociology, and all of this. So they engage with students like yourselves to do master's project. There is a very, very important project called the Indian Community Cookbook Project, which is done by students from Flame. It's a beautiful project about documenting recipes, so please check it out. So there are various possibilities in digital humanities. I can tell you bits and pieces about the MSc in digital humanities.
So our students here are eligible to apply to all of these if they
Yes.
don't have a science or
Yeah, yeah.
computational
Yeah,
background?
yeah, yeah. They can do that for MSc Digital Humanities. They cannot probably do that for the MSc Computational Social Science that is there, because English graduates can't. It's meant for, I'm not very certain about it. Because I engage more with the digital humanities people. I take a few classes here and there. So yeah, yeah. Huh. Yes. So this is the argument of what we fear a lot, is that AI has not yet become sentient, that AI can't yet start thinking for itself. And people on Twitter and comment sections are about, please stop thinking about this. There is a whole franchise that tells you, Terminator, that why this is a bad idea. Please stop engaging with sentient AI and so on and so forth. Jokes apart, yes, you are right, because the data that is fed, see, the limitation of AI right now is that it can generate. It can generate based on what you ask. So it's a tool and you are the master. Yeah, so AI thankfully can't yet think for itself. That is a different question. Huh, that is a different question, because uh, in terms of jobs, it is not the machine that takes the job away. It is the human that knows how to operate the machines, they take the job away. For example, I'll give you an example. In the mid 90s, okay, the then left government in West Bengal, before I was born, sorry, they had this revolt march called Automation Anti-Nation. Those of you who know that, because the computers had just started to enter the Indian market, and the Silicon Valley was supposed to happen in Bengal, but the left government resisted it, which is why it went to Bangalore. Yes. So automation anti-nation became a slogan of the left government, that it will take the jobs away. Right. But in the mid 90s, people had no idea that after 20 years, there will be a job called prompt engineering. There will be a job called SEO writing. There will be a job called writing captions for Instagram. If you would have told people to do that 20 years ago, they'll be like, are you high or drunk or something like that? So we don't know what jobs we are going to have in the future, which is why it is very important for us to learn, to keep ourselves updated. Because once again, the machines are not taking the job yet, until and unless it becomes sentient. It's the humans that who know how to work with the machines. They are taking the jobs away. Absolutely. Yes. 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 Yeah. Yes. Menial, yeah. You can, which is why now there is a lot of debate as to whether you should use ChatGPT for academic writing or not, because there is a question about ethics that comes into the picture. That how do we use it? Is it plagiarism? Is it not plagiarism? What should we ask? What should we not ask? There is a whole committee of the MLA, which is the Modern Language Association, called the CCCC. My supervisor is also part of it, which gives guidelines on how to use AI for academic writing. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I am also the editor of a journal special issue, and I am getting papers which are giving acknowledgements that generative models were used only for language corrections and structural enhancements of the paper. The content is the user's own. Okay, now a friend of mine was having her proposal defense a few days ago, and she checked it for similarity. First, it showed 10% similarity. She was freaking out. Oh my God, what's happening? And then she revised it, everything, and it put it in the system again. And it shows 30% similarity. How is it possible? So these systems are arbitrary. There is no constancy in these systems, so we must engage with them critically. Thank you so much. Thank you.